Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Pisgah Podcast.
We are your hosts, Drew and Mangler, and we're coming to you live from the rock quarry at DuPont.
Ooh, I always enjoy hanging out here in the rock quarry. It's such a different and interesting spot. So thanks for coming back for our second episode. Here we are, Drew. It's real.
Well, now that it's real, let's get on with it, because we've got a packed episode this week. So, how was your week? Did you get much riding in?
I did. It was a fairly productive ride week. I did a cold Canuga session. Kind of wanted to shake out some of my winter weather riding gear because it was like 38 when we hit the trails. Then the next day I did a hot springs area night ride to test out a new light along with aforementioned cold riding gear as there was a little bit of snow in the trail.
Is that some foreshadowing?
It might be, especially if you haven't read the episode show notes for this week. Oh, I also did some gravel road and light trail in the Old Fort area over the weekend after it rained, which is also definitely some foreshadowing. And then I capped it off with a Little Mills River rip this weekend. What about yourself?
Not a whole lot, just a little bit of Bent Creek riding and a little bit of cruising up and down the French Broad River Greenway.
Oh, that's always a good time. Oh, Drew, here's some interesting news I stumbled upon this week. A friend of mine, her mom that lives over in Tennessee, texted me a photo of a newspaper article that had the byline, $6 million grant to fund mountain bike trails. It was by the Associated Press, so shout out to Linda Huff for sending me that. So I did some digging on it. After hitting a couple of newspaper paywalls, which is fairly common, I found an article from WATE-TV ABC 6 out of Knoxville that gave a little more information. So it's a $6 million grant from the Appalachian Regional Commission to Cott County, Tennessee, for use in the Cherokee National Forest area. So for those of you who aren't as familiar with these zones, Cott County essentially extends from a little south of where I-40 crosses into Tennessee and extends up into the Hot Springs area, but doesn't quite cover all the trails in the Hot Springs zone. The county line is pretty much the Paint Mountain Trail that it sends down from the Switchback Overlook. And then the county extends south down to a bit of the Smoky National Park.
Wow, that's a lot. But what interests me here is the wording that specifically mentions mountain bike trails. Previous trail construction projects we've seen pop up as of late have used kind of a different wording, such as recreational trails or multi-use trails. So I'm definitely interested to see in how it's worded.
Yeah, that also piqued my interest as well. Here, I'll read a quote from U.S. Senator Lamar Alexander. This is a huge investment from the Appalachian Regional Commission. Cott County is one of the most economically distressed counties in Tennessee, and this investment will help increase the tourism industry in Cott County while bringing more of the 12 million visitors who come to the Smokies each year and the 3 million who come to the Cherokee National Forest each year to the area. This is a result of a 3-year effort to make better use of the Foothills Parkway right-of-way in Sevier and Cott counties. The focus was about mountain bikes, and the best land for that in Cott County turned out to be in the Cherokee National Forest instead of the Foothills Parkway. So I'm thrilled about the 50 to 75 miles of new mountain bike trails in Cott County in the Cherokee National Forest. I'm also glad we're also moving ahead with mountain bike trails on the Foothills Parkway right-of-way in Sevier County. These new bike trails will help even more Tennesseans enjoy the outdoors.
So yeah, that is very explicit wording. Mountain bike trails.
Yeah, 100% yes. I'm going to do some more digging this week and see what other details I can dig up on this. That zone has a lot of good topography and has a lot of potential, so stay tuned.
So the topic of overcrowding is an interesting one, especially here in Pisgah, Western North Carolina area. Since COVID, we've had a huge spike in numbers of visitors.
You're not wrong, Drew. And the unfortunate side effect of more visitors is more of what they bring with them and leave behind, which is sometimes their trash. But one of our amazing local heroes has been making a change, starting off with one simple task, to pack it out. Now, if you've ever been to the hub to get a beverage, chances are Lindsay slung your brew. But in her off hours, she's slinging trash out of the forest.
My name is Lindsay Rutland. I live in Pisgah Forest, North Carolina right now, and I'm working at the Hub. bike shop bartender. It's a little bit more fancy than that. I get to book all the food trucks and kind of be the face that everyone sees, but that's what I'm doing right now. When I was about 22 years old, I decided that Jackson, Mississippi was not the place to afford me what I was looking for in life, which was enriching who I was, and finding out what it was deep inside me that kind of made me tick. And one thing that did was the outdoors. My mom had moved to Charlotte, North Carolina with my sister, relocated there after my sister graduated high school, and I got introduced to kind of like the Boone area. We'd escape Charlotte and kind of head up to the mountains. So I started kind of going outside there on my own, just hiking, and quickly found a bouldering community of people. Eventually moved to West Asheville, where I got a job building whitewater kayaks with Liquid Logic. So I started kind of hanging around some boaters, never got super into boating. And then not until I moved to Brevard did I get introduced to mountain biking and fly fishing. So then now I'm kind of doing it all. And, went from Boone to Asheville to here. And I've just been kind of delving into all of it.
You've been recreating multi-sport-wise in the National Forest for many years now. And obviously you have a huge love for the outdoors. What was it that inspired you to start Packout Pisgah?
It didn't take much thought, really. I had never thought of it before. Whenever I recreate, I would see trash, always have. So I've just maybe picked up what I could, shoved it in my pocket, and never really thought twice about it until this past year. It started really last year, I guess 2019, on Avery Creek Road in Pisgah Forest, 477. There's a bunch of group campsites that are right there along the road, and usually those people that camp there need to move every, 14 days or so. I started noticing that those people weren't really going anywhere, and they were really kind of sprawling out, and when they would leave, they would just kind of disappear, and the whole campsite would be left really with all of their stuff. And there was one really significant campsite back there last year that was left. I don't know, if they were leaving because of an emergency or if weather had come. I don't even really remember. It was sometime in the fall, and the campsite was just abandoned, and there was trash everywhere. And then a bunch of local people, started going out and just picking it up. And then you'd hear about it through friends. Oh, did you see that campsite on Avery? Isn't that terrible? Someone just left. I mean, how could they leave all this stuff there, And so bit by bit, local people would go in and start cleaning that up. And then going into 2020, it's just everywhere.
And specifically that area,
Yep.
There were like those 3 camp zones that just, me and Jessica actually saw the Forest Service police telling them they had to pack up and leave.
Oh, wow.
Then the next day they were gone, and they just left all their shit everywhere.
Yeah.
And it was there throughout the entire pandemic shutdown.
That was one of the first posts that I did, actually. Roman Rosinoff had sent me a picture and said, hey, look at this. This is on Avery right now. I said, is this not from last year? And he says, no, I know it looks like the one that was real bad last year, but this is actually just this year. And so, between Avery Creek Road, I saw it. I saw it significantly around Daniel Ridge area, those group campsites as well. I started noticing at that local swimming hole, the whale's back that's now known, very well by everyone. Everyone would just leave stuff, whether it be a chair or diaper bags or food, tent poles, whatever it is, flip-flops. Everything just started being left. So one day I just kind of was hiking around with my dog and kind of daydreaming and thought, what if I just picked up this trash, would take a picture right where I was, document it. I bet people would really like that. I just thought this could be something, so I just started to. And then it started taking off. Not only the community wanted to be part of it, but a lot of the way that it happens is why it's taking off too. So much momentum of, I don't do a pack out day or a time. I do it as a part of what I do when I go out and recreate, whether it be biking, whether it be hiking or fishing, whatever I'm doing. I'm picking up trash in the moment while I'm doing my sport. Then I go home and I have not only done my sport, and I've also made myself feel a little bit better too by packing out what I could. Try not to go too crazy with it. I mean, you will see trash everywhere.
You don't have to look hard for it.
Yeah, you don't. Just trying to make it part of the practice going out.
Is there like a certain zone that you think just gets a lot more disrespected than other zones?
I am noticing the most of the trash that I pick up are for sure from group campsites, accessible sites that are alongside of the road, pull-offs. Every pull-off all the way down the Davidson River before you even, get over to the fish hatchery or anywhere over there. All of those pull-offs on the side of the road, there's trash. Every parking lot. There is something to be said. I don't know where the mentality came from, but people don't want trash in their car. It's the first thing that I see here at my job at the hub. People are walking from the parking lot and they've got bags of trash that they've been holding on to the whole time that they rode on the parkway, maybe, let's say, and then down the mountain to get here. They just want it out of their car, and it doesn't matter if it's going to overflow your trash can or if they're going to set it down somewhere next to a trash can or just out in the woods where they just don't want it in their car. And that's what I'm seeing at all of these parking lots, Daniel Ridge, Cove Creek, anywhere you can park, Looking Glass, everywhere in the parking lot, there's trash. And it's mainly because people are taking it out of their cars and they're leaving it there, maybe under the assumption that there's a pickup service. I don't know why they would get that, because all up and down the Blue Ridge are the posted signs that say, no garbage service, give a hoot, don't pollute, all of this stuff. A lot of people are just privileged, or you're selfish and not really thinking about what the second half of it. You're just really worried about yourself and getting it out of your car, getting it off of you or whatnot, and they're not thinking about the follow through.
How easy is it to just pack out?
So easy. I mean, everybody has these crazy poop bags, right? That is also blows my mind. Why would you bring these poop bags out into the forest for your dog? You're going to pick up poop in a bag and leave poop in a bag outside.
Just flick it
for
off.
what?
Yeah.
So I do that exact I'll bring a poop bag with me, whether it be in my pocket or in my pack, and I'll use that bag to fill up every little bit of trash that I can find. And then when I get out and go home, I throw it in my trash can.
Yeah.
It's not that hard, but I think a lot of people, especially right now with COVID, it's almost like that's an excuse to oh, don't touch the trash. It could be tainted, it could be this, it could be that, or even just a discard of it even more so. Maybe COVID plays a factor in that. But I do think that it's just awareness. They're just not aware that we don't have the funds in Pisgah National Forest to be able to have staff to go and pick up trash at all of these places.
What's your vision with this? How do you want to see this grow?
I've been approached a lot, and a lot of ideas of, hey, let's do a pack out day, or hey, why don't you get with this other person that's doing this and let's collaborate. And I never wanted it to be like that organized of a thing. I didn't want it to be like, okay, well, yeah, Packout Pisgah, and I helped them in April when they did such and such event. I don't want it to be that. I just kind of wanted it to morph into just a mindset that people would eventually click on these hashtags that I'm using before they visit the area, maybe while they're here, maybe they already live here, and somehow through one of those hashtags come across my post and then click and nosedive for a minute into my page and see, oh, these are all these local folks. They're just doing it while they're already out there. So it's not an additional thing that they have to sign up for, or some sort of a burden in any way of okay, well, let me schedule a date that I can help them in the future. It's something that you can do now on your own, no matter what you're doing.
And that's something to be said with the COVID scenario that we're currently in, is like group activities are somewhat discouraged. So you just go out by yourself, right?
That's right. Yeah, a lot of folks thought I was doing this with people on a certain day. And it took enough posts and me kind of using hashtags, tagging people in the post, and trying to praise each person that does a pack out in an individual way, so that when people are scrolling and they're clicking, they're seeing, oh, okay, this is, Walker Parrott doing this, or oh, this is Jeff Furman doing this, or oh, this guy did this. Oh, it's not just Lindsay, it's these random people. I wanted to motivate people to do things now.
How do people share with you?
Super easy. You do a pack out, just take a picture of the trash and send me a message on Insta. Send me the picture and just say, this is where I was. This is what I was doing.
Simple as that.
That's as simple as that. The best way that I have found to build a little bit of this momentum also is to encourage in the post, or to be positive and bring it to light rather than negativity.
Yeah.
There's so many things that you can start spiraling, like, oh, look at this crap out in the woods again, the fifth time I've picked this up, or what are these people doing, or depending on the kinds of trash I'm finding, there's tons of things that you could say, but that's not going to make people want to pick up trash. So I just try to spin each post and say, oh, this is what this person did. Isn't this great that they found the time to decide to make it just a little bit better, leave it just a little bit better. That's great. So kind of try to support people and spin it in a funny or positive way rather than looking at it in such a negative way, because it can be. Look at it in the most positive way and say, yeah, it's here, but guess what? It's not right here right now. I picked up this parking lot and
Ain't here anymore.
yeah.
We're in the forest a good amount. When you put yourself places more frequently, you start seeing more interesting and random stuff. It's like, you're not going to see a bear unless you're in the woods all the time, right?
Right.
In your opinion, what's the funniest thing someone has found on a Packout Pisgah?
Oh gosh.
I know the one I'm thinking of.
Which one are you thinking of?
The office suite.
Oh, yes. That was wild. All the computer. And I like the response that someone said. It was like, oh, too bad for those guys. They were totally setting up like a smashing party to go out there and just smash some stuff in the woods. And you ruined it for them. I thought that was kind of funny. Of course, like the random shoes.
Yeah, the one shoe.
I guess the one shoe, the one red Fila that Walter Wilson packed out.
That was a good one.
Because the Fila was like this red high top, old school Fila that was like upside down in the river. And then he fished it out with his fishing net. So I got that part of the story when he messaged me. But it was kind of crazy. He's a fisherman and see this like Fila upside down floating in the river right past him. But single shoes, yeah, I think that's funny because it's always like on the Davidson or just under Sliding Rock or Looking Glass, and it's like a flip flop or, and you can just, put the story right in your head right then of like, oh yeah, I can totally see so-and-so, they're out there on this waterfall or this slippery area and you lose your shoe.
Yeah.
And then now you don't have a shoe for the rest of the day. So probably shoes. There are a lot of underwear, and I don't know what's up with that. But people leave their underwear in the woods a lot, too. So a single shoe and underwear.
Well, awesome. Well, Lindsay, thanks for your time. Hopefully you get blown up with pictures to post of people packing out from this.
I hope so. Yeah. I think it's going to continue.
It's awesome that Lindsay is bringing awareness to this. It's something most of us usually practice in, maybe not to the level that she does, but if I see trash around where I'm parked, I'm going to pick it up.
Oh, totally. I think one of the challenges people face is the germ factor given our current COVID climate. But Lindsay's suggestion of carrying doggy poop bags with you is genius. I'm always seeing masks discarded, and that's definitely not something I'm trying to touch. but I'm scooping it up with a doggy bag and whatever other trash is around. Totally doable and way less germy.
Oh, for sure. So I've scored a couple of posts on the Packout Pisgah Instagram. One of them was coming back from a Bennett ride. I took note of some garbage bits on the way in on Avery Creek Road to grab on the way out. Well, one thing led to another, and next thing you know, my hands are full of squished bottles and cans I found along the road. However, the garbage gods graced me with a piece of discarded tarp along the way, so I was able to use that as a bag and grab some more goodies. Super easy.
Very easy. So littering will get you put on the naughty list. Picking up litter will get you on the nice list. Speaking of being naughty or nice, what is Santa bringing Mangler this Christmas?
Oh, man. Well, keeping with the theme of our tradition, I like to keep my Christmas wish list a little more locally and regionally focused. Kitspo has a new line of some gloves, the Highline leather gloves, which is named after one of my favorite trails in the Sedona area, and some of their Haskell shorts. I'm kind of picky about my shorts, and those look to be spot on for what I'm looking for. Also, Rottgeist has the gondola dropper compatible seat bag for some bike pack action. One thing that's cool about a dropper post bag is, you don't necessarily need it for a bike packing trip. Just say you want to do like an extra longer ride, and it gives you places to pack more room for snacks. And then shout out to Shanna Powell with Endless Bike. She just recently launched a direct mount chain ring, and so that's definitely on my list. And I'm ashamed to say that I do not have an industry non A35 stem on my bike yet. So maybe Santa would bring me one. And maybe if I can score a couple of more posts on Packout Pisgah, I can get on the nice enough list to score some Cane Creek EE wings. That'd be the ultimate right there. Now, what about yourself?
Man, after the year of riding I've had, I think I need some passes to Canuga, the Riveter, Colo, and places like that to get my skills polished back up.
Okay.
Some nice leather ooey beverage holders.
Okay.
Those always make a great gift.
They do.
Time of year to start wearing the wool socks, so maybe some Cush wool comp socks from D Feet. I like the 7-inch cuff personally.
Ooh, I'm more of a 9-inch guy, but I feel you.
Yeah, I'm shorter than you, so that makes sense.
Yeah.
I need a new way to carry my spare tools and water, so I've been eyeing up that Weevil mule sack.
That's their newer one. That's like the medium sized one, right?
It holds 2 bottles, not just one.
Oh, Dos Bottles.
Yeah. And another piece of gear I've been eyeing up is the Squatch Co. Squatch screen. That way I don't have to moon everybody when I'm changing clothes after a ride.
Oh, that is genius. I love that.
Yeah, and just because the days are getting shorter and it's harder to get some daylight riding in, hoping Santa will bring me an Outbound Evo downhill light package.
Okay. So it's interesting that you bring out the outbound light. Maybe you call it the foreshadowing I mentioned earlier, but I got Tom Place on the horn this week to talk about Outbound and their new release of the Trail Evo light. Let's take a listen.
My name is Tom Place. I am one of the two people running Outbound Lighting right now. So I'm a mountain biker primarily. I come from a lighting background. I used to work for Cree LEDs for almost 7 years in R&D and applications engineering, and left actually to pursue making bike lights. And circuitous path, fast forward 3 years. Here now I'm partnering with Matt as the founder of Outbound and the optical design engineer that saw an opening in the bike market where he thought he could do something better, something more novel and interesting. And I said, hey, I can help you make it more biker focused and help with some of the minutia and the industrial design and the user interface and all that. And so we started working together a year and a half ago or so. And now I'm officially full time, and this is what we do.
Awesome. How did you get into mountain biking?
10, 12 years ago, 10 years ago, something like that. My best friend from growing up got into mountain biking in high school. We ran cross country together. I just never cared about bikes. My dad always road biked, and I hated Lycra and little twitchy handlebars, and it made me uncomfortable. So I just never rode. And then my buddy forced me to go out on a gravel ride in Umstead Park in Raleigh. And I was on a specialized stump jumper at the time, and it made no sense for the gravel, but I was just having a blast doing dumb shit in the ditches off the side and everything. And I thought this could be cool. I'll give this a shot with him. And he basically told me to go buy this bike. He had a friend selling a Surly Karate Monkey for $700 with a decent, Fox at the time 32 fork on it. That was my single speed entrance into mountain biking, and it just kind of snowballed from there.
So that was your mountain bike background. What is your professional background? Like, what'd you go to school for and stuff?
Yeah, I went to NC State undergrad in mechanical and electrical engineering, and then a master's in mechanical. I had intended to stay in academia and do more, and then I realized that was dumb and I didn't like it, and I wanted to actually build stuff and do things. So I left quickly and I started working for a water treatment company. That was fun because it was hands-on, but on the whole, it was generally uninspiring work. And I was trying to work in the LED industry because I played with them for fun. I'd make my own bike lights while I was working at that water treatment company. They were terrible, but it was fun. And so I went to work for Cree. It took me 11 months to get a job there, of applying and interviewing. And I ran our applications lab that, served basically all the big clients like Philips, GE, Panasonic, all the big players. They would actually get attention from us. If you're a small company making 1,000 lights a year, you didn't get house calls from Cree engineers. So I was doing that for around 7 years or so, and I loved that. I fit in there. It was a great job and a good group of people, lots of very smart, very motivated people, but it was 50 to 60-hour weeks every week for the entire time I was there, and they kind of beat you over the head, and you had to have the right personality for that. And I didn't want to leave and had no intention of leaving, and then I had an opportunity to pursue some entrepreneurial efforts making bike lights i9, and that didn't work out for a number of different reasons, but I still test wheels. I still got i9s and all my stuff, and now Clint's using my lights with Outbound, which is awesome, and he gives me great feedback. He's the only customer so far that I've had 2 warranty replacements from.
Clint goes hard.
Yeah, I thought, oh, of course he's got a problem with something. He managed to drown one of them on a particularly wet ride, so that was fun to open up. He was the first legitimate water intrusion failure on any of our lights. That was cool. Yeah, so my background is mechanical electrical engineering and heavy on the LED lighting side. That's been what I do for fun, making flashlights and that sort of nerdy stuff. But then, I like walking in restaurants and just looking around at the lights and seeing what works and what doesn't, what do I notice and what should they be doing. And it's just, it's armchair engineering. That's the kind of stuff that I really enjoy. And working with Outbound now gives me the opportunity to do that with the 2 things that I love the most, lighting and bikes, which is so far great, but it's a lot of work.
Yeah. How did you get hooked up with Outbound?
When I left Asheville, because I lived in Asheville for almost a year, I moved out to Arizona following my special lady friend, and I was doing some consulting engineering work for a company part-time that I could do remotely, and just looking for basically partners to continue my endeavor that I left Cree for. I saw that Matt was doing something interesting with Outbound. He had launched on Kickstarter about the time I moved out here, and so I wasn't about to jump on this random Kickstarter campaign that looked cool but hadn't actually delivered anything. So I basically waited for a while and gave him 6 months after delivering product, and saw he was still around, hadn't folded immediately, had actually delivered product, and his customers were all pretty vocal and pretty happy. So I sent him an email, said, hey, we should work together because I can help you make a better product. You're doing something that no one else is doing, and I think between the 2 of us, we could make something really unique and actually push the envelope. And that email was probably like 6 pages long and way over the top and a little too direct, but he responded with maybe 8 pages back, and we actually started working together remotely we figured out it was just over 11 months from the first time we communicated via email to the first time we actually met or spoke in person. I flew out there over Thanksgiving last year to do some last minute reworks on the first production run of Hangovers, our helmet light. And I had never talked to him on the phone, and I had never met him in person before that point. We had been working together for 11 months, all through email and Facebook Messenger, which is crazy.
That's definitely something crazy to think about. Like, you hadn't heard the dude's voice.
It's funny actually because he's got a couple of videos that he had made for the lights just to put up on the website and YouTube and whatnot. And I looked at him and it was good because it's showing the beam pattern and the real discriminator for the lights. But I messaged him and said, "Yeah, you need to get a better narrator though. That guy's not cutting it." And he said, "Hey, that's me, asshole." And I didn't realize he's actually deaf. He's been deaf since he was 3. He's got hearing aids. He can hear and talk just fine. He can also turn off his ears and not hear. And so he doesn't end up talking on the phone a whole lot.
That probably explains why you guys had so much written communication back and forth.
Yeah, it was just what he's used to and it's easy for him. And I was fine with it because it was less, it worked for what we were doing because we didn't have like set hours that I was working on outbound stuff. I was trying to make it work in my spare time and whatnot. So we're, messaging at 11 p.m. and 4 in the morning and whenever. And you can't really call people and talk every day, multiple times at really inconvenient times. So it actually worked out well. And we just found we never needed to talk on the phone for anything. And actually still don't. I've probably actually talked to him on the phone maybe 5 times. Everything else is pretty much through the computer and it works.
That's awesome. I was familiar with Outbound's products like the trail light and the road light.
Mhm.
And I think I'd shared one of their Instagram posts or something like an ad I got to you a long time ago. I'm like, what do you think of these lights? Because
Mhm.
you had given me a bunch of shit for running the cheap Asian lights off
Yeah,
Amazon.
sure.
And you were like, actually, I'm talking with these guys right now. And
Yeah.
so I guess that was probably when you guys have first started talking. And is
Mhm.
that kind of when the ball started rolling for the hangover light development?
Pretty much, yeah. So we maybe within a month or 2 after that, because it took us about 9 months to get from initial design to the first shipped production sample. We had some production delays because we got some parts from vendors that were low quality and had to make changes and redo them. But yeah, it started pretty quickly thereafter. And we basically said, all right, you don't know me. I'm some random dude from the internet who sent you a novel in the first email, and I don't know you. You're still a fledgling company. You survived the initial, the first year. I don't know what the term is for it, but survived the Kickstarter curse and are still bringing in money and have customers and aren't flailing. So let's do a test, like a litmus test, and see how well we work together. So let's design a product together, and I'll give you feedback on everything as the rider, because he rides bikes, but not, he just recently moved to Chicago. He's got a 3-year-old kid. He doesn't really get out on the trails very often. Whereas I, out here in Scottsdale, it's beautiful weather right now and all year round for the most part. So I'm riding 5 or 6 days a week and night riding quite a bit, even in the summer, because it's so freaking hot. So I just said, let's make some prototypes. I'll give you some feedback as to what I think is important from a rider perspective. We'll go back and forth and, refine a little bit. That's what started the hangover and what got us to the end design, which is not perfect for everybody, but it's perfect. Or, it's optimized for what it was intended to be. Super lightweight, self-contained light, and not meant to be the sun trapped on your helmet. I think it was a good test, but it took a while because I'm spending a couple hours here and there, and he's doing it full time while keeping production up. He's assembling, packaging, shipping every single light in Chicago, so he was busy too. So yeah, that's kind of how that started.
So let me ask you this. Have you ridden Hangover Trail at night using your hangover light?
I have once because I felt like I had to.
Of course.
Yeah, but honestly, I had actually pitched to call it Highline initially because I love Highline. Hangover is not my favorite trail.
It's my favorite trail.
Right, I know. We have very different riding styles, you and I. For me, Hangover is one of those ones, kind of like it's one of those trails that if I lived in Sedona and I had people coming to Sedona to check it out, yeah, I'd take them on Hangover. But if I lived there, I would probably never ride it because it doesn't get my rocks off when I ride that. But Highline I love. So I had actually pitched to call it Highline initially. Hangover won after multiple group votes.
I think it sounds better as a product.
Yeah, and a lot of people thought it had something to do with alcohol, and they just thought that was kind of funny. And it was like, not even a little bit. You thought, it hangs over your head. It's hangover, and it seemed fitting. That trail's no joke either. There's some pretty high risk sections.
I mean, they call it hangover for a reason because it hangs over your head. So that definitely adds a little bit of spice to it when you have a light on top of your helmet. However,
Yeah.
Your light is very low profile, so that does help.
There is that. Insert sales pitch here.
What were some of the biggest challenges you guys had when developing the Hangover?
I think the biggest challenge we had initially was just vendor quality. We got our prototypes, and prototyping, depending on how you do it, isn't cheap. We did a lot of 3D printing, and because of the type of construction we have a polycarbonate top shell that's overmolded with this rubberized TPU, kind of like GoPros have, where you pick it up and it feels rubbery. And that two-part structure, it requires two molds, requires an overmold. Prototyping that is not cheap because you can't just machine that material. There's not a quick way of doing it, except with different materials that have different material properties. You can 3D print it, but it just doesn't feel quite right. So you're kind of taking a leap of faith based on all the tests you do with different materials and process types to get to the final design. And then when we got there, we had some, like flashing where the molds meet up. There was a little bit of flash that had to be removed, and if it wasn't, it would fold under and create a water intrusion problem. All right, well, we got to clean that up now. We got to put tighter specs on our vendors, and just unforeseen quality issues that we just didn't think would be an issue until we started putting it together. You can design things all day long, but once you actually get them in your hands and put them together, you realize that your best laid plans to make something efficient and smooth and simple doesn't always work in reality. There's tolerances on everything. There's just how you hold the product while you're putting certain pieces together. We had basically designed it so the PCBs had soldered together at a right angle, and then the battery connected to it, and then that dropped into the unit. Well, that also created a challenge for applying the thermal interface material behind the LEDs so you can get the heat out into the housing. Because if you're just inserting it straight from above and you have grease, it scrapes all the grease off the wall. So you don't actually get any between the two materials. So you have to kind of angle it in and then press back against the surface and then smear it down a little bit, which is not hard, but it's one of those things when you're doing it, 1,000 times, it takes a little bit of English. And if you don't do it quite right, it messes things up. So we had to retool a couple of times and change some things just to make it more consistent on our end. And that I think was our biggest challenge, was just getting over that last hurdle of manufacturing so we can scale. And also why we're not trying to sell, 1 million units this year, because we couldn't possibly keep up with that. We got to get better.
How was it coming from working with a company like Cree to working with various vendors and manufacturers? You have mentioned that there were, some quality challenges in there. Like, how was it working between, coming from that level of manufacturing to doing stuff yourself?
It's different. We try to be as made in the US as we can, but it's honestly, our lower shells, for example, they're cast magnesium and they're powder coated. And there's a couple of reasons. I can talk for hours about why they are that way. But suffice to say, we have an Asian vendor and we have a US vendor. And the US vendor we try to get parts from, they were more expensive, of course, but we were willing to pay that premium to an extent because we got, service down the street. We should get quicker turnaround times, better support, and presumably higher quality. And they were slower and worse quality.
That's a bummer.
We're paying a premium for slower and worse quality. And that's not all American manufacturing. That was just the first one we tried. So we're still trying other places, but it's just disheartening. And that's, you roll the dice with a company that you've never worked with before. So it's really about developing relationships with the right companies that can take your feedback and understand it and make changes along the way, because nothing is never perfect out of the gate. There's always adjustments that have to be made. And if they're, they go into that understanding that's the case and are willing to pivot and can do it efficiently, that makes all the difference. That is very different from working at Cree, where all of our manufacturing, 100% of it was internal. We'd have supply issues where raw materials would come in from certain vendors, but never like a finished piece that gets put into an assembly for everything else. It's a lot easier when you have, the entire manufacturing reports into your company. You have a lot more leverage to really push and affect change there. I can only get so upset with a vendor about their poor performance before they don't want to work with me anymore. We haven't had that issue with any of our current vendors. One of our previous vendors from over a year ago didn't like us so much, but thankfully our PCB vendor is down here in Gilbert. They're 35 minutes away from me. So I spend a lot of time down there and work with them, and know their test technicians and a lot of their operators, and they're extremely helpful as a result. If I couldn't be there in person, we would end up being a lot slower, just because I can't pitch in and help, and I can't build this relationship with them that lets them know that we're really invested in this and that it's important, and we're committed to their success as well. Because if we succeed, then they get more orders. Everyone wins, right? But it's just more delicate when you're working externally versus internally.
With what you learned from designing and building the Hangover, you just released the new Trail Evo light. How did you go about designing the Evo from what you learned with the Hangover?
Yeah, there's a lot of things, and I'll try to keep my response to less than an hour and a half. Uh, Essentially, we started with the same basic platform because we liked the overall architecture of the Hangover, and we wanted to make essentially a product family around that. Cast magnesium lower shell, overmolded, TPU overmolded polycarbonate uppers, and then polycarbonate optic, and self-contained USB-C rechargeable. So we kept a lot of the same feature sets. They just ported over. But there are a lot of we learned a lot in component selection. As an example, on Hangover, the USB-C port we use is a waterproof port, and it's got a seal around the edge of the port itself, so it slides into a slot in the housing to seal with the housing. So even if that USB door is open, it should still be water resistant. We actually chose that initially not for that reason, but because of the pin layout and our board footprint. It was a very tight space. At any rate, what we found is the tolerance to fit that port and that seal into the housing was so tight that just normal tolerances in PCB manufacturing and then in the thermal grease application caused a bond line thickness variation, so that that port, when you're inserting, would just catch the edge of the housing and it wouldn't pop in. It would dig into the housing, and if we're not careful, you can either break the port off or have it misaligned after assembly, and it makes for one extra like really tedious step to make sure that you got it perfect while you're assembling it. And ultimately it doesn't really matter, because that so long as we get the door sealed, then we don't need that to be waterproof. And it was more expensive and it was a headache to assemble. So on the Evo, we also couldn't inspect the solder joints on it because they were underneath the port after it was soldered down to the board.
Oh,
So we would have to test every single port, both directions, because USB-C has data pins that are redundant. So if you put it in one way, it'll fast charge. And you put it in the other way, if you have one of those little pads floating underneath that connector, it won't fast charge. So we had to check every single light flipping around both ways. Now with Evo, all the solder joints are visible, so we can do automated visual inspection.
better QC checks.
Yeah, and we can do that on the PCB line as they're coming off, so we know all those solder joints are solid. So we expect there to be zero fallout. And when we do the testing now, we don't see any fallout for any boards that don't have visual defects. Great, that's one less test we have to do during quality control, and it's one that we can get rid of, not because we don't care if we have issues, but because we're already catching it with another step very reliably. And that port, easier to inspect, easier to install. We have a larger gasket around it. The door seals better. So we make changes to make it easier to manufacture, a lot easier to inspect. Pretty much across the board for the Evo, there's a lot of individual examples like that, where the top shell, the way it clamps down to the bottom shell, it's kind of got a tongue and groove gasket for the seal around the outside.
Yeah.
Instead of a single interface. That seals better, and it helps kind of pop it in place so that it's always aligned with the external edge. With the one single seal, we found some that had some like waviness a little bit to it. You could feel a
you
ridge.
could get a wavy where like one part of the ridge may come over on one side of it or something.
Right. And so, little changes like that. We had our optic, floating in an overmold on the first one, and we'd see some alignment variation that would cause some beam pattern variation. Not much, but it's enough that when we're looking at it, nitpicking, we can see it. So, okay, we're going to get rid of that and go to have better alignment pins for the optic that also help with assembly. So pretty much everything we did was focused on making it easier to assemble, not to make it cheaper, not to make it easier for us, but to make it a more consistent quality out the door. Because then we don't have to feel like we have to see every single unit by hand and inspect it for 5 minutes to make sure that it's good. We know that if somebody's following our standard assembly practices, we can hire employees and we can have an assembly technician that's focused on just that, and we're good to go. And then a lot of the rest of the design was just, focused on the application itself, which is to complement the hangover. So we got a lot of customer feedback on the hangover. We made changes to that immediately, and some we made proactively as a rolling change, so updates as we went, and we're adapting Evo to account for all those changes that we made along the way. So they're very intertwined, those two products.
They look great. I just used the Evo to take my garbage can down the driveway.
Oh, good. That's a good first test for that. Yeah.
I'm pretty impressed with it. I really like the design and how I like the cable grabs on it, how you can tuck the cables in back behind it, because that is one thing that has annoyed me with previous lights is, they kind of will sit somewhat on top of your handlebars, but you're still going to have the cable shadows shooting out in front of you a little bit. And it's just enough to kind of mess with your eyes a little bit.
Yeah, and that's that was one of those things that Clint actually at I9 was so adamant about when I was there, is he just hated the glare off of the shiny cable housing for your brakes and for your shifter.
Yeah.
And so I remember he had put some black felt on there to reduce the glare, to absorb light that was hitting it and things like that. And we toyed around with that a while, just like, what could we do to fix that? And I hadn't really touched it again since then. And then we got into the Evo, and I thought, we're going to be trying to mount this thing centered in front of the stem and down low, because we want the bar on the light on the bar to be lower to help project shadows from things sticking out of the trail, to give the trail depth. And that means it's going to be closer to your cables. That's going to be a problem. If our light can't be positioned in a place to avoid that, we need to address it. I played around with a bunch of different things, and at some point had zip tied some cables out of the way for getting some video with our old trail light. And I thought, well, we don't need a zip tie. We could just have a hook. And if we make it from the right material, then it'll, it's not going to tear the cables. It'll just bend open if you crash and spin your bars or anything like that. Or it'll break that little plastic
It releases
piece.
the cable.
Yeah, it'll break the plastic piece before it rips your cable out or anything like that. And that's preferable because it's a small piece of plastic instead of rerouting your shifter cable, for example. So we just 3D printed a couple of them and realized it's actually possible for us to 3D print something that works well enough for that. And so that's what we're doing until, we see whether or not people actually care. Because not every bike needs it. My Rocky Mountain Slayer, the way the cables come out of the down tube, they've got an upward angle. So they come up in front of the stem pretty badly, which is never a problem unless you're positioning a light there. So I have to use the cable clip, otherwise I get pretty horrendous glare off those cables. But on my older, got a 2016 Kona Process 111, because of how those cables are routed, they're a lot lower, and I don't need the cable clip and I don't get glare. So it really is just something that can attach with a single screw and give people the flexibility to use it if they need it. And that actually is kind of how we look at a lot of these products, is not by figuring out what people want in their lights necessarily, but what they don't want. What's the thing that annoys the crap out of them, that every time they go and ride with their light, the mount rattles and they can see the beam shaking around on the trail. Or, it's micro USB, and then, as the saying goes, there's only 2 ways to insert it, but it always takes 3 tries.
Yeah.
It's
wrong,
annoying.
right.
All right, well, now we've got USB-C. It's impossible to insert it the wrong way.
Was it more
silly,
expensive to use USB-C?
I've heard that assertion before from others. It's not like it adds $4 to the cost of the light. It's pennies. It might
Okay.
be 20 cents more. It's not significant. It's just the port that's different. What does add cost is high-speed charging. So you can get 1 amp charging ICs that control that from any USB port pretty cheap, and you don't need all these additional components. For QC 3.0 and for power delivery and all these high power phone charging devices and things, if you want to get up to 3 amp charging and above, and particularly to negotiate for higher voltage, you have to have a voltage converter on there. So you have to have another inductor, which might add 60 cents, and then all these other additional components on the board. So we add some cost to our lights just by putting that on there, but that's also what allows us to charge to 80% in an hour on hangover.
And I
And we,
appreciate the quick charge because it's helped me numerous times.
yeah, that's great to hear. We did it initially because we wanted it to be hey, I forgot to charge my lights, so I'm going to put it on the charger while I get ready and in the car while I'm driving, and I'll still have some light. What we found is we also really wanted to be able to extend runtime, and we can get enough power through the high-speed charging that we can double runtime on max output with USB power banks if you've got the right a power bank that can put out enough power. So far, it seems like not very many people are using that feature. It's not like 50% of customers are regularly using external packs, because I think most riders for night rides, they tend to be 2 hours or less. Local rides, shorter ones. But for the bike packers and big adventure guys and like I-9 night rides where it's 4 hours out in the woods,
Been there.
5,000 feet, yeah, you want to make sure you got light the whole time. And so the ones who use it really use it. They've given us great feedback on that. Not complimentary feedback necessarily, but good design feedback for things we can improve in the future. So it's good to have vocal customers because we can take that and incorporate it back into the product.
You launched the Trail Evo, like 10 days ago or so.
Yeah, the Friday before Black Friday.
How are things going?
Good. We have a lot of good problems now. We are absolutely slammed. The response, we thought it would be, like double our hangover release from last year, because we're a growing company. We got more customers, more people would be interested. And it was like almost 8x what we expected. So we have had to burn the candle at both ends and sometimes in the middle just for maximum burning efficiency. And Matt has been working 12 14-hour days just assembling lights, packaging, shipping, getting things out the door to prepare for Evo. We haven't even shipped Evo yet because Evo's all getting assembled here in Arizona. So at our PCB vendor, we're doing all the board population, automated inspection, depaneling, programming, thermal grease, optics, battery soldering, top shell, QC testing, and packaging out the door. So the lead pile of lights for that is on its way up to Chicago, and then it'll all ship from our warehouse in Chicago. And yeah, we've been pretty full tilt, and we're only going to stop when we run out of parts, which will be soon because COVID seems to have affected literally everyone, particularly the bike and the LED industries, as it turns out.
Interesting. Let me ask you this. The first version of Outbound Lights, the trail and the road light, Matt used an external battery with like a 3.5 millimeter female type of plug scenario. Did he have concerns about using a USB type of connector with the Hangover when you started pitching those ideas?
Not at all. He actually much preferred it. He was not as in the bike community as myself. So he got feedback from the people who got feedback from, and based on what he wanted to do for certain aspects of performance for that initial product, external battery pack made sense, and that DC 5521 connector, same as Glowworm uses on their packs, same as a lot of the like kind of standard 7.4 volt bike battery packs. They use that same connector because it worked. It was tried and tested and all that. But I'll tell you this, we have a pretty low warranty rate altogether, but the biggest warranty fail with a bullet is those cables on the initial trail. And it's partially because that connector for that
It like
barrel jack
locks in super
it's
hard
so
and
tight.
it's hard to
Yeah.
pull it apart.
Yeah, and so people end up yanking on it to pull it apart, and what happens is the cables start to wear over time, so the light will work, and then it'll just break connection for a second, and the light will go off. So he's more than happy to get away from that whenever possible. And the nice thing about the setup with like Evo, we'll still be able to run external battery packs to supplement battery time with the power banks, but the USB-C cable does not require 10 pounds of pull force to get it apart. It's just simpler. It's easier to get cables without custom things, and it's going to be better across the board. So we're happy to do that. And the current trail product's not going away. At some point in the future it will, but we'll eventually have probably a dedicated external battery light. There's a lot of people that have voiced only helmet light riders. They do not want to strap anything to their bikes. Buddy Chris in North Carolina is particularly bad about that. His bike has to be perfect and shiny and only have the necessary things on it. No bottle cages, none of that garbage. So he won't have a handlebar light. And our hangovers, I've ridden with it by itself on the helmet. It's all right, but it's not meant for that. You want a little bit more light if you're just going to do that. So we're going to make something that's higher power, external battery pack to keep the weight on your head lighter, and because a lot of people like that. It's not what I use when I ride, but a lot of customers want it. So we'll get around to that, and when we do, we're going to try to make that USB-C so that we can get away from proprietary connectors where possible.
That's great to hear. I was contemplating asking you about an external battery helmet light,
Hmm?
but I didn't want to like potentially stir the pot on you because I.
Yeah, stir the pot, man. Stir away. We get this feedback all the time from,
Mhm.
the moment we release a new product, one of the first comments was about that. Like, when are you going to have this product that I want? I'm like, okay, well, we've got this one right now. Give us a little bit of time and we'll get there.
Most of the time, I'm using the Hangover as my like emergency get out of the woods light, which I
Mhm,
think it is amazing for that. It
mhm,
like I don't like riding with bags or pouches. I usually just ride in like bibs that have pockets, and that light fits nicely in my pocket. I will use it on some of the big Anon night rides where we're
mhm.
out for 5+ hours, and we're in terrain where you kind of need to have it on high for a lot of the time.
Yeah.
And so I'm utilizing that external USB battery setup,
Mhm.
and so I definitely enjoy that.
That's good. Yeah, I think that's a common use too. Is the like you say, the emergency get out of the woods light. It's for people who are doing twilight rides that are starting in the daytime and they might finish after dark. They don't want to kit up with like an external battery pack, cable, garbage all over the bike, and all this work to get set up if they're not going to use the lights. So if it's something you just, the last 10 minutes of your ride is in the dark, you can just toss it in a jersey pocket and not have it be super obtrusive. A lot of people like that functionality, and that's honestly why we went with the battery size that we did for that. Is we could have improved runtime quite a bit going with a bigger battery, but we wanted to have the lightest weight self-contained light in that category for that reason. Something small and unobtrusive and didn't wear on your neck after long rides, and that was paramount for that product. So in the future we can certainly expand to slightly heavier, longer runtime lights for that, or brighter ones. That was one of the driving reasons for the Hangover design in the first place, was that kind of emergency light usage.
So when I bought my Hangover, it just had like the high, medium, and low.
Hmm?
And then over this past winter, you plugged your computer up to my Hangover, it did stuff to it, and it
Hmm?
added a fourth function with the light setting. Talk to me about that.
Yeah, so and that's I kind of alluded to that earlier with I didn't want to mention it because then we'll get a bunch of requests for it, but we've offered this to people with the first wave of lights that we shipped. The first 500 or so had our initial program user interface. We made some choices based on feedback we'd gotten, and then we released it, and people hated it. So we immediately made a change, rolling change to all future ones, and said that, hey, if you had the first generation that has just 3 modes, we'll send you a swap unit with the updated firmware, and you can send your old one back and we'll refurbish it. And we did that for a couple of reasons. One, we're trying to listen to the customer, and if they're not happy with what we're putting out, then we're not done yet. What we realized is we'd basically tried to make the light as simple as possible at the expense of versatility and performance. And that was the wrong call. So initially, what we did is we basically just had adaptive, medium, and low. Adaptive is where essentially it's a passive adaptive where it starts at max brightness and then slowly tapers the light off a little bit as your eyes adjust to the darkness. So you don't notice the degradation of light so much. And that gives you additional runtime, and it's good. Where that's not good is if, say, you're doing an enduro style ride like out in Pisgah where you're grinding up clawhammer for an hour and then hike a biking for 20 minutes and then bombing max speed for 20. In that situation, you would burn a lot of your light up getting to the top, and then you wouldn't be at maximum brightness for the downhill, and that's not good. So what we did is we kept adaptive and added a dedicated high mode and then medium low. I don't like having 4 separate modes to cycle through, but at least you don't have to cycle through a strobe mode or freaking SOS or some dumb shit like that.
Yes,
Um,
thank you for that.
yeah, still for the life of me, don't understand that. I'm sure there's somebody who has used a bike light with an SOS to save their lives at some point. It's basically catering to two different types of ride groups, right? It's the cross-country type ride versus the enduro ride. And I think that covers the majority of night riding for trail riders, where adaptive is the set it and forget it. So the light always turns on adaptive. So you just click it once, it's on in the mode you want it to be on, and you just don't touch it for the rest of your ride because you're pedaling up and down a lot and you don't want to constantly be fidgeting with it. High, medium, low gives you basically high and low for enduro rides, where 3 miles an hour up a gravel road, you put it on low because you don't need to see 300 feet down the trail. You're just grinding away. You just save your battery. And then high is guaranteed 100% output until it gets to 5% battery, and then it trips down to low to give you some time to get out of the woods. And the idea there is that most of these, particularly these self-contained lights, that don't have external battery packs, they taper light output off pretty heavily almost immediately. And by the end of an hour's ride, you might only be at 25% output instead of 100%. And what if you're at the top of upper black and you want to get down with max output and you've only got 25% as an option? That's not okay. So we put the 100% in there so that even if you only got a little bit of your battery left, you can still put it on 100% maximum for as long as it'll hold, so that when you need it, it's there. It's an option. And I think that gives people more flexibility. It also got rid of a mode restrict step where it would step down to medium and then step down to low. Everyone hated that because they assumed when it stepped down to medium, that means the battery's dead. We didn't do a good job explaining that to people, and turns out nobody wants it. So we got rid of it. That kind of covers the highlights of why we made that change. And an Evo and Hangover have identical user interfaces. So there's no double clicking or holding or weird patterns you have to remember between the two. They're just the same. And I think that'll help have some consistency. So when you pick up an Outbound product in the future, this year's model is going to be the same as next year, is going to be the same as 3 years ago, that sort of thing. And we're kind of starting that now with these two products. I would say that one of the things I get asked about a lot with the Evo and the Hangover is, can you use just one of them? What I try to explain to people is that we designed those two lights in particular to use together because they serve very different purposes, and both of them, not necessarily necessary, but they greatly help you ride and process the trail at speed when you're trying to, ride technical trails really fast. A lot of people just want to do helmet or other, or they think, oh, well, if you're going to have one light, just have the helmet. I'd say we designed these two specifically so that if you're going to have one light, it's the Evo on the handlebar, or it's a handlebar light. And the main motivation for that is that it's where you don't notice the weight of the batteries. It's not wearing on your neck. You don't feel it flopping around in your helmet when you're riding. So you can have a larger, higher power light and not notice it as much while you're riding. And because your handlebars are never pointed right where you want them to go anyways, you have to cover a larger spread. You have to have a much wider beam pattern to make sure that you don't have this random, really intense spot just bouncing around your field of view. And you want to cover everything very evenly, including your peripheral. I get a lot of people that say, I like night riding because I'm only looking at what I'm riding. I'm not distracted by the stuff off the trail and things like that. And I get that. It's a different experience. Some people enjoy that. But if you're going to ride fast, I am making the pitch to people, whether you buy our lights or not, get a very wide, high power handlebar light first, because what the helmet light does by itself is it flattens the trail. For Pisgah, where it's super rooty, for Scottsdale and the desert here out in South Mountain, in Phoenix, where it's super rocky, you've got a lot of stuff sticking out of the trail. And if you've got a light above your eyes, then it's shining light behind those rocks, so you don't see shadows at all. And so everything looks flat. But the handlebar light will cast shadows, so that rock sticking up looks like a rock sticking up. And if that fills in your periphery with those shadows as well, it gives you depth that you may not notice when you're unless you see it, unless you try it, right? That's something that really makes a big difference when you're riding at high speed, because you're having to process the trail as you're going very quickly.
Yeah.
And if it's flying past you and it looks flat when you're just out of the corner of your eye, you see something that might be a rock, but it looks flat, then you might be, a little too far forward, and your weight's too far forward and it hits your front wheel and it pulls your bike back from underneath you, and now you're over the bars and off balance and wonky. Whereas if you can see quickly out of the corner of your eye, oh, that's a drop, that's a 1 foot ledge or something, you can weight your bike differently and respond to it faster. And it's not just, we're not talking about like, bike parks where it's, A-line tabletop after tabletop. You can eye up the one feature, but when it's raw, janky trails in particular, having that peripheral vision and depth from a handlebar light makes a huge difference in your ability to process the terrain quickly. So that's where we designed the Hangover and Evo to work together. Where the Hangover, its primary purpose is to fill in down the trail for high speed runouts and into corners. And the Evo does everything else on the bars. That should do the handlebar light does the heavy lifting.
That's kind of how I've always had my lighting set up is my handlebar light is like my main light, but my helmet light fills in where I'm looking.
Yeah. And I think it makes sense, and I think it works well. That's part of the reason that I want to make lights, is because I want the best stuff for me to ride fast the way I ride, and I much prefer the janky, rocky, rooty trails. And so not having, just having a helmet light doesn't work for me because I don't read the trail as well, and it causes me to be less balanced and slower. And so that's why I made these lights the way I did. So at some point we'll have these other products, the higher power helmet light, because everybody's got their own personal preference. And I get that. We don't want to tell people that they're wrong for thinking something the way they think, but I just wanted to explain why we made those the way we do. It's not just because we think everybody who thinks helmet only is, we think they're dumb. It's not that. It's just we have that's our perspective. So I would encourage people to, for science, give it a shot. Try it. Kind of like fiddling with your suspension. You don't know what it does until you actually change it and feel the difference, right?
Well, Tom, awesome. Thank you for your time. I know you've got a busy schedule right now, and you're burning the candle at all the ends. There's no wax. There's just only a burning wick at this point. I wish you all the luck in having a continued successful launch of the Trail Evo. And I can't wait to put it to use on the trails this week.
Hell yeah.
I was hoping to do it, maybe tomorrow night, but we're having a nice little cold snap and it's currently snowing. And
yeah,
I'm not ready for that winter cold yet.
It's cold out here too. It's like 67 degrees right now at 7 p.m., whatever it is. So it's starting to get brisk. You can come out and visit.
See you soon, buddy.
Sounds good. Thanks, Mike.
Drew, what's interesting is that my first night ride ever was with you in Bent Creek. And actually, I believe it was around this time of year.
Yep, I believe so. I think that was like 6 or 7 years ago.
Yeah, that sounds about right. And since then, we've been on quite a few more night rides together and on separate occasions. What's one of your favorite night rides?
Man, for the experience, I kind of like to ride DuPont on a full moon. It's surprisingly bright up on Big Rock on a clear night.
I've not ventured out to DuPont much for night rides. I know they allow you to play till 10 p.m. or so. So that's actually a good spot, especially for riders new to night rides.
Yeah, getting used to how your eyes perceive depth and distance at night is something to get used to. So it's not a bad idea to do your first couple of night rides on something a little more chill and something that you might be more familiar with. So what about you? What's your favorite night ride?
I usually like doing a middle black to Sycamore, something front range Ranger District. I like warm food, so it's nice to do a night ride that has a chill climb. I can keep the lights on low and then have a good descent with the lights on high and then cruise to the Waffle House for a post-ride waffle.
Yeah, that's something good to bring up. It's managing battery level. Like Tom said,
Oh,
the
yeah.
majority of night rides are less than 2 hours, but it's always a good idea to have a little extra in the tank for those unforeseen circumstances, like changing a flat in the middle of the night.
Oh, yeah, that's never fun.
No, but batteries have gotten a lot better than they were during our first night ride, and we're lucky to get like an hour on high with those things, with those batteries at that time.
Yeah, and the batteries are like twice the size of what they are now.
Yeah, it's cool to see companies pushing the envelope with LED and battery technology in the bike industry outside of things like e-bikes and drivetrains.
For sure. Another thing that's improved since our first night ride was winter riding gear, which you have to tune into next week to hear our winter riding gear discussion.
Yeah, that was not a warm night ride.
Usually, most winter ones are not. But all right, guys, so that wraps up this week's episode. Make sure you hit us up on the social medias. Just search Pisgah Podcast.
And if you ever thought you could get that extra lap in while the sun was setting and you got darked on the way back to the trailhead, go ahead and click that subscribe button.
Yeah, I've been dark way too many times. So, yeah, I'm going to go hit subscribe again. So, Drew, when's the next full moon? I like to get out on a Cedar Rock Big Rock night ride with you sometime soon.
Yeah, I've already got it on the calendar. It looks like it's December 20th.